It is officially budget season for state lawmakers, and when he unveiled his spending plan this week, Governor Cuomo said that the process of putting together and passing a budget is actually very simple, if you can take the politics out of the process, that is. Here to discuss whether that is actually possible are the members of our Reporter Roundtable. With me this week are Yancey Roy of Newsday, John Campbell of Gannett News, and also our own Nick Reisman. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for being here.
Good to be here.
So we'll start with you, Yancey. Budgeting, not political.
Never is it? I
No,
don't think
never.
It's probably the least political thing that happens in Albany. Now, you know what is true, I think, this year is it does seem like there's certainly less obvious controversies right at the start of this session. They've kind of agreed to where they're going in education aid. Overall, there's still going to be a fight about how you sort it out a little bit. And otherwise, there were no big flashpoints. Minimum wage, there's not complete agreement on how to do a minimum wage hike, but they're talking about parameters that seem to set up for an agreement. You know, potentially one of the disagreements out there right now is casino gambling, which kind of didn't get a lot of attention the first day. And will the legislature, as they've indicated, kind of fight the governor for the authority to have a hand in exactly where these sites go?
You know, I'm not going to say that I missed the days of, and I actually caught the tail end of this when I first got to Albany, of late budgets into the summer. But I do think that the legislature has gotten, and this is not just because Governor Cuomo is very strong, a little bit cowed. And I think it chagrins them. I mean, do you hear from legislators sort of lamenting about the fact that the legislative process is not what it once was?
You know what, it's kind of interesting in that, you know, you didn't really feel much pushback at all against the budget. You know what I mean? You didn't have anybody out there saying, you know, this is a terrible document or anything. And it seems different just from a couple years ago. I mean, not even as far back as you're talking here. But I think there is a general sense, like Yancey said, that, you know, there aren't any terribly major hang-ups at minimum wage. The one that does keep coming up, though, is the 15A assessment, which is an added fee on utilities that was passed.
18A.
I'm sorry, 18A.
Right, 15A is like a real estate thing.
I'm sorry, 18A. And that's one that it's an extra $500 million for the state, but that's one where you do see Republicans pushing back in terms of that charge on utilities.
And how much does he want to generate from that? Do you remember?
It's about $500 million a year.
Yeah, like it's significant. I mean, and then you can quibble, and you reported on this yesterday about whether extending revenues is actually tax increases, which Steve McLaughlin says yes, but he's sort of a voice in the wilderness.
Well,
on
it's all semantics, but he is, you know, he's not, you know, creating any new taxes, but he is coming up with these tax extenders where there's a number of taxes and fees that are due to expire at the end of the year, and he is going to be re-upping them, some for quite a while. And he's finding like other weird little revenue sources as well. Like one thing that's getting a lot of play right now, I think, in a lot of local newspapers,
the speeders?
Is the people who are speeding. They're going to really start cracking down on people who.
I was just in traffic court not too terribly long ago. When I heard that, I was like, wow.
Actually, you know, if you ask the governor himself whether he's ever been caught with a speeding ticket, I think he's been caught with quite a number of them too.
Did he say that?
He's said that in the past. Yeah, he's a speeder, or has been.
Well, he doesn't
when
drive
he drives
himself that much anymore.
But yeah, he is finding, you know, various little revenue sources. He's also, and this could be an interesting thing too if there's a fight over this, is transferring money from the state insurance fund.
Yeah.
Right.
We have this pool of money out there in case, you know, all of our insurance companies that the state does business with suddenly call in the liabilities. And this move is transferring.
We haven't seen this movie yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm already on the weekend.
I
No,
know.
they're transferring this money into the general fund, and they're going to use $250 million of it in the coming fiscal year.
You know, but this brings us back to you, Yancey, which is to say all of these things are potential sticking points, but none of them are the kind of epic battles that we used to see when 1199 and the Greater New York Hospital Association would put up these incredible ads about, you know, the governor wants to shut down your emergency room with a woman rushing with the baby in her arms and pounding, you know, on the closed door, and the baby falls to the sidewalk. I mean, you remember these things.
Well, yeah, of course. There was, 3 times during the Pataki era that the budget was more than 100 days late, and it lasted into August. The thing about it is the dynamics are incredibly different now. For one, the governor now has the power, it's yet to be tested, to come on April 1 to just give them a budget and say adopt this budget or shut down the government, and nobody wants to do that nuclear option. The governor also has a 70% or plus approval rating, which is another factor here. And then the other factor is they've taken care of some of the controversial stuff, such as school aid, ahead of time. And all in all, if you were going to sort of liken this to a card game, when it comes to the budget, the governor has about 50 cards in the deck. The Assembly has one card, and the Senate has one card. And the Senate is in a little bit more fragile balance now than it was in years past because it's a coalition. It's not one-party control.
Before we get to that, and I do want to talk about the Senate because it sort of like fell apart yesterday and then put itself back together oddly, and I think we'll see that a lot over the coming couple of months. Speaker Silver did do an interview with our sister station, New York One, yesterday, and brought up an interesting point that could become a real issue, which is he's not thrilled with the idea of the teacher performance evaluation plans continuing to be tied to that education aid increase.
Yeah, he had said, I'm sorry I didn't see that interview, but he did say earlier in the week as well that, you know, he's got 60% of his members from New York City. He doesn't want to see the New York City school district continue to be punished going forward, and that would be a difficult thing for his members to swallow, and that could be a potential sticking point.
It's an interesting little lever of power that the governor is kind of holding over school districts, you know, quite frankly, when it comes to, and also the teachers union as well, when it comes to agreeing to these evaluations. Some of these agreements only last a year, which is why we're seeing that back in the budget.
90% of them, or I think, was the more than 90% was the number that only last a year. Well, let's get to the Senate. What the heck happened yesterday? Anyone want to jump in with that? They were in session and then they left, but they didn't gavel out. And we were going to get this list of committee assignments, which, by the way, the Assembly put out without any problem. And it came out like, what, midnight?
No, it came out around 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. And then close to midnight, well, right, you pick it up from there.
Well, essentially what happened was the IDC Republican coalition extended 2 committee chairmanships to mainline regular Democrats, Eric Adams and James Sanders. They also are both black. The IDC, even though they've added Malcolm Smith to their ranks, has been criticized for shutting out minority power and minority voices in the legislature. So even though they were given kind of lower tier committee chairmanships, it was still kind of extending this leadership position to these guys. Adams, who was running for Brooklyn Borough President later this year, took it, said why not. And James Sanders, whose name was included on that press release, and there was apparently some miscommunication as to whether he was accepting that committee chairmanship, because shortly after midnight and after we had posted something online, after I think the New York Times had done a story.
You did, right?
Well, we followed up with something.
I think the Buffalo News did something as well, but there were a couple of media organizations who had covered this. Sanders announced, "I'm not taking it."
Okay.
The one I want to highlight is you saw some switches in some key committees. One is Diane Savino is now a member of the Independent Democratic Conference and a former labor leader, is now the head of the Labor Committee, which had belonged to Joe Robach, a Republican. And Robach kind of got this newly created committee on infrastructure and capital needs, which hadn't existed before. So he actually didn't return our phone call today. But we're not entirely sure what went down there.
Well, you know what it underscores is just, again, how fragile this coalition of 30 Republicans and 6 Democrats is going to be when even something as rote as doling out committee assignments, which usually doesn't get much coverage at all of a sudden is an issue that everybody's watching to see how they roll out. And yes, there were some missteps, and it just seems as though, you know, there's going to be a lot of things that probably were taken for granted before and how the legislature works that are going to be closely watched now just because of the composition of the leadership.
And here's a really loopy thing about that new committee, too, that was highlighted by Bill Mahoney from the New York Public Interest Research Group today.
Oh, right.
And that's because they're adding this new committee that's not in the Senate rules. It's going to take, I think, 2 Democratic votes to change the rules.
Well, one is Simcha Felder.
Yeah, one would have to be Simcha Felder. And so who would that second one be?
Eric Adams.
It would have to be Eric Adams.
The Senate Republicans did push back on that a little bit, and I'm not entirely sure the ins and outs of it, but there is some disagreement over whether you need a simple majority for that or if you would need those 2.
We should say there is one more new committee, and it is a committee that focuses solely on New York City education, and it did go to Simcha Felder, who is the Brooklyn Democrat who is now caucusing with the Republicans, and he is an Orthodox Jew, and his main concern is state funding and state support for yeshivas, which are, of course, religious educational institutions, but also, of course, the Catholic Conference is also interested in that, but that's his main gig. And I think that he made it pretty clear when he had meetings with Senator Skelos about whether or not he would run and who he would be sitting with if he won, that that was his main interest, and certainly he was awarded that. You know, so the committees, I agree, Yancey, that they're rote, but they're patronage of a sort, right? They're internal patronage.
Sure, it's everyone who serves as a committee leader gets a nice stipend to add to your salary. You get it puts you in a position of leadership. It gives you control over a few issues. It certainly directs interest groups towards you. It's, you know, it's something that all of the senators and assembly people, for that matter, all want a committee chairmanship to lead one of the issues at the Capitol.
Well, and it comes with a Lulu.
That's what I said, stipend.
Yeah, so right. So since they haven't gotten a raise since, what is it now, 1999,
99.
that those stipends are either a few $1,000s, or if you're in leadership, like, you know, more than 20, I think it is. They're pretty high. So it can very much bump you up. I do want to just briefly touch on national. We did see the inauguration speech this week I was there, from Barack Obama.
Lucky you.
And I know, and he turns to the left. I think most people would agree. And there were a lot of echoes, I thought, of what happened with Andrew Cuomo. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Does anybody agree, disagree, thoughts?
Well, I mean, the big one was you saw him speak about gay marriage, essentially, and that was something that the LGBT groups really latched onto. I mean, that was a surprise from my end, and I mean, he really kind of went further out on his position that he had begun to unveil during the campaign.
And the Cuomo-Obama parallel, I think, is really fascinating. If only because there is one major difference, and that's Cuomo has to run for re-election in 2014, and Obama is done after 4 years. He's term limited out of office, and I think now that he realizes he's really got, you know, maybe a year and a half to spend what political capital he has from winning the election, and then, you know, it's on to planning the presidential library. But there's a number of things that, you know, he would like to get done, and I think he's also recognizing that his presidency, winning twice now, has maybe fundamentally shifted the political polls in this country.
Well, you're right. There is a sort of theory among political scientists that a second-term president has about a year to get something done, because by second year, all the Congress is running for re-election and all the steam is out. And I think it's also a recognition of what has happened in second terms of other recent presidents. Yeah. Hurricane Katrina to George Bush, the Monica Lewinsky scandal to President Clinton, you know, go back to Iran-Contra for President Reagan. I think there's got to be someone there who's, you know, realizes that you got to start that second term with a lot of momentum if you're going to get anywhere.
And we're already, of course, talking about 2016, and we saw the really interesting testimony by Hillary Clinton, who's on her way out as Secretary of State, on the Benghazi terrorist attack. So we saw Joe Biden making the rounds down in D.C. He hung out with the Iowa Democrats, invited the New Hampshire governor to his swearing-in ceremony. So, you know, already people are jockeying for position, and Governor Cuomo is making national headlines. I mean, he's in the mix, certainly, so we'll keep an eye on that too, without harping too much on it, because I know people think we're getting ahead of ourselves. That is this week. It was pretty busy, considering it was a holiday, but not for all of us. I want to thank you guys for being here. Who knows what next week will bring. John Campbell, thank you. Yancey Rohr, thank you. Nick Reisman, thank you very much.